All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to our explainer on Gerald Ford. Today, we're looking at a man who is arguably the ultimate crisis manager. Ford was thrust into the presidency during one of the absolute most turbulent periods in modern American history, taking on this monumental task of healing a deeply, deeply fractured nation. So today, we're going to unpack exactly how he navigated a truly unprecedented set of circumstances.
Here's the roadmap for our analysis today. We're covering 1. An unexpected president, 2. The controversial Nixon pardon, 3. Whipping inflation now, 4. Cold War in Vietnam, and 5. A legacy of healing. As you'll see, Ford's remarkably brief 895-day presidency was just packed with simultaneous constitutional, economic, and global crises.
Starting us off with Section 1, an unexpected president, and the 25th Amendment succession.
So you got to think about this incredible constitutional anomaly. How exactly does someone become president of the United States without a single citizen actually casting a ballot for them on a national ticket? Prior to his presidency, Gerald Ford had only ever run for election in his home congressional district over in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Sure, he was a very popular House Minority Leader, but he had absolutely no national constituency. So how did he end up sitting in the Oval Office?
Well, the answer lies in this rapid, honestly chaotic chain of events. The 25th Amendment, which had just been ratified back in 1967, clarified the rules for presidential and vice presidential succession. When Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned in October of '73, President Richard Nixon used this brand new amendment to nominate Ford. After a thorough FBI background check and overwhelming bipartisan confirmation in Congress, Ford became VP in December. And then, just 9 months later, as the Watergate scandal hit its breaking point, President Nixon resigned. On August 9, 1974, Gerald Ford took the oath of office, stepping into the presidency under completely extraordinary circumstances.
Moving right along to Section 2, the controversial Nixon pardon and healing a fractured nation.
Ford spoke these incredibly famous words right after taking the oath of office. "My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over." His number one priority was to just reassure a deeply troubled public. You see, the nation was entirely paralyzed by the Watergate scandal, and Ford firmly believed that as long as Richard Nixon's fate dominated the news cycle, the country simply could not move forward.
So, just a month after taking office, Ford makes the fiercely controversial decision to grant Richard Nixon a full, free, and absolute pardon. Naturally, the Democrat-controlled Congress immediately wanted to investigate if some sort of secret deal had been struck. In response, Ford took the bold, virtually unprecedented step of appearing directly before the House Judiciary Committee to explain his decision. It was actually the first time since Abraham Lincoln that a sitting president testified before Congress, and he did it entirely alone. No lawyers, no briefing books, just transparently answering questions to halt that congressional investigation in its tracks.
But as you might expect, the immediate fallout was intense. An estimated 60% of the American public vehemently disagreed with the pardon. A lot of citizens and commentators felt it just continued the whole Watergate cover-up and prevented a trial that might have finally answered some lingering questions. The backlash was so severe, in fact, that his own press secretary, Gerald Ford, resigned in protest. Ford knew it was going to be politically disastrous for him, but he maintained that he was doing it to protect the nation from years of divisive legal battles.
So, while dealing with all this constitutional fallout, Ford also had to manage severe economic turmoil, which brings us to Section 3, whipping inflation now and domestic enemy number 1. The crucial context here is that in 1974, consumer inflation was running at over 10%. Just imagine the price of your groceries and gas skyrocketing month over month. Ford considered this domestic enemy number 1. To fight it, his administration launched WIN, which stood for Whip Inflation Now. It was essentially a massive public relations campaign designed to enlist everyday Americans to change their spending and savings habits to try and cool down the economy.
Now, despite the administration having these well-intentioned goals to trim government spending, and Ford did veto numerous bills to keep the deficit down, the WIN campaign itself really struggled to gain any serious traction. The campaign pins, which were these large red buttons with bold white letters, were widely mocked by critics. But hey, the campaign definitely invaded popular culture. There's this fantastic anecdote from a 1974 lunch meeting where President Ford earnestly gave Beatle George Harrison a red win button, and in return, Harrison literally handed the president a button featuring the Hindu mantra Om.
Shifting gears from the domestic economy, let's look at Section 4, Cold War in Vietnam and winding down global conflicts.
By April 1975, the immense, crushing weight of the presidency came crashing down. South Vietnam was falling to the North Vietnamese army. Congress had refused further military aid. Recognizing the imminent danger to Vietnamese citizens who had supported the U.S., Ford absolutely insisted on ordering an around-the-clock evacuation. It was incredibly risky politically. If more American troops had died, the blame would have landed squarely on him. Yet he pushed forward, successfully evacuating over 120,000 refugees, including many orphans, and he later fought Congress again to secure funding to help them resettle in the United States.
Ford's foreign policy also involves some really delicate Cold War diplomacy. In 1975, 35 nations signed the Helsinki Accords. As you can see, the agreement was divided into 4 baskets of focus. While Ford took heavy criticism from the right wing of his own party, who really felt he was selling out to the Soviets, he realized the strategic brilliance of Basket 3, which focused entirely on human rights. By signing this agreement, the Soviet bloc was suddenly forced on the international stage to answer for how they treated their own citizens. It was a total masterstroke that later leaders noted was a crucial step in eventually bringing down the USSR.
And that brings us to our final section, a legacy of healing and the 1976 election.
The 1976 election was just incredibly tight. Ford was facing some massive headwinds. He had to fend off a strong primary challenge from Ronald Reagan. He was weighed down by the lingering legacy of Watergate and that intensely unpopular Nixon pardon. And of course, the economy was still struggling. He was up against Jimmy Carter, an obscure former governor of Georgia who ran a highly innovative campaign as a Washington outsider. Ultimately, Carter secured a very narrow victory, winning 50.1% of the popular vote to Ford's 48%. Just like that, Ford's 895-day presidency was over.
But that is not where Ford's story ends. While the Nixon pardon absolutely likely cost him the '76 election, time completely shifted the historical perspective on the man. By 2001, history had vindicated his character to such an extent that he actually received the prestigious John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award. During that ceremony, Senator Ted Kennedy, who had vocally opposed the pardon back in '74, publicly stated that Ford had been right all along. He had sacrificed his own political career to save the country from chaos and begin the healing process.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Gerald Ford was never elected to the presidency, yet he managed a staggering convergence of crises with his quiet, selfless integrity. So what really is the true measure of a leader? Is it doing what's popular just to ensure your own short-term political survival? Or is it making the difficult, incredibly unpopular choices that ultimately secure long-term historical vindication? It's a fascinating question, and Gerald Ford's highly unique presidency gives us plenty to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.